The jury found George Zimmerman not guilty of second-degree murder in the killing of Trayvon Martin. The court of public opinion, however, is not done, and there is a huge cry for justice for Trayvon. The outcome of the trial forces all of us to take a good, hard look at how we feel about and treat young African American males in our society. Up next on Another View, the Honorable Judge Jerrauld Jones, Law Enforcement Executive Chief Bruce Marquis, and NAACP Chapter President Clarence Wilson shares their insights on the question, where do we go from here? We'll start the discussion right after this news from NPR.
Discussing the issues and celebrating the successes of the African American community. This is Another View.
In the Circuit Court of the 18th Judicial Circuit in and for Seminole County, Florida, State of Florida versus George Zimmerman. Verdict: we, the jury, find George Zimmerman not guilty.
And with those words, George Zimmerman is a free man, and America is once again grappling with the issues of race. Hello, everyone. I'm Barbara Ham Lee. Welcome to Another View, where we discuss today's issues from an African American perspective. Before we start, let me say a very special hello and welcome to the students from PB Young Elementary School. They are here with us today at WHRO, learning about public media and digital storytelling. I am very excited today to welcome to the show the Honorable Judge Jerrauld Jones, who sits on the Norfolk Circuit Court. Hi, Judge Jones. How are you?
Good afternoon.
Good to have you with us.
Thank you.
Law Enforcement Expert Chief Bruce Marquis. Hi, Bruce. How are you?
I'm fine. Barbara, how are you?
I'm doing great. So glad you could join us.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
And President of the Williamsburg, York, James City County NAACP, Clarence Wilson. Hi, Clarence. How are you?
Hi, Barbara. Thanks for inviting me to join in.
Absolutely. I appreciate it, gentlemen. And just so that our audience knows, I did ask our guests if it was okay for me to call them by their first names, and they said yes. So I'm not being disrespectful. So I just want everyone to know that. Let me ask you, gentlemen, from a personal perspective, where were you on Saturday night, and what was your initial reaction when you heard the verdict? Let me start with you, Clarence.
Thank you, Barbara.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I was at an NAACP convention here in Orlando, Florida, which oddly enough is just about 30 miles away from Sanford. And we had several discussions among us about the probability of an acquittal, and most of us was on the side that there was no way that could happen. So when it, in fact, did, it was with disbelief. And we were with a number of young people who had an even more vocal outrage at the verdict. So we were here in Florida with the NAACP when we heard it, and it was met with quite a lot of distress.
And I'm going to get more in detail with that in just a minute, but I wanted to hear, Bruce, you just got back into the country, I believe, and I'm just curious as to your reaction.
Well, I was sitting in my hotel room in Kathmandu, Nepal, and I was watching CNN, and there's a 10.5-hour time difference between Eastern Standard Time in the United States and where I was in Kathmandu over in Nepal. But I did happen to catch the verdict as it came in, and I thought for sure the verdict would be something different.
Mm-hmm.
So I was surprised at the way it came out.
Judge Jones, what was your reaction?
Well, I was at home here in Norfolk. It was in the evening. I was leaving town to travel early the next morning, so I was kind of getting ready, packing and getting ready to go. And my wife called me to tell me what the outcome of the verdict was. She had the television on, and so that's how I learned that I was at home. Barbara, I've been in courtrooms for 33 years as an attorney and now as a judge, and you never know what will happen with a jury or a jury verdict. And so I didn't have any preconceived notions one way or the other. So that's the way I reacted to it.
And I know that we're not going to second guess the jury, and we're not going to get into the nuances of the trial because the decision has been made. But I would like to know, Judge Jerrauld Jones, what you think in terms of the idea of that the NAACP and others are pushing the Justice Department in terms of a civil rights case being brought against Zimmerman. I mean, do you think it might have a chance?
Well, there's certainly a lot of historical precedent for it. I mean, it takes us certainly back to the civil rights movement in the 1950s and 60s when state court prosecutions of murderous conduct and atrocious conduct on the part of Southern citizens was not vindicated through the state courts, the local courts in those particular states, and it was the federal government that did come in and investigate and ultimately, in a number of cases, initiate civil rights law, 1983, Section 1983 suits, and other deprivation of federally guaranteed rights. And ultimately, there were successful prosecutions, quote unquote, if you will, not for the underlying substantive criminal law violation, because that had been adjudicated by the sovereign state, but the federal statutes that protect the civil rights of all citizens were the mechanism by which justice was ultimately secured in a number of those cases. So there's certainly ample precedent for it historically.
Clarence, Attorney General Eric Holder says, we need to get rid of the stand your ground laws. Can you talk a little bit about what that was like being there, listening to the speech in Florida, and what the reaction was?
Yes, those words were electric to that audience because the stand your ground laws puts a lot of emphasis on the individual decision-making process, and so we believe that that's a law that does indeed erode many of our rights. And the prevailing feeling around with Trayvon Martin was that the stand your ground law was applied to one side but not the other side, and so his comments were well received. There's been a long-standing view of the NAACP that stand your ground laws should be rolled back because of their uneven application.
So what will the NAACP do, Clarence, moving forward in terms of trying to put things in place to repeal those laws? And I believe they're in about 38 states at this point.
Yes. And I think the plan is to go state by state. Obviously, one of the strong suits of the NAACP is the legal advocacy. We've got a very, very strong advocacy bureau in Washington, so obviously we will use that. But we're also mobilizing our young people, mobilizing our branches to bring pressure on the local legislatures to explain the discrepancies, use data to begin to work with our local legislators to help them understand the real disadvantages that this law is bringing to our community.
Bruce Chief Marquis, from a law enforcement perspective, how difficult is it to enforce a law like the Stand Your Ground law? I mean, that was one of the criticisms in the trial, was that the police didn't do anything in the beginning, or took a long time to even arrest Zimmerman, and so that there could be a trial.
I think it's extremely difficult. In this case, Barbara, there were no on-scene eyewitnesses, and so we were only provided basically with one side of the story, if you will. I know there was a friend of Trayvon's who was on the phone, but again, the phone was dropped. And so what we're dealing with from a law enforcement perspective is the fact that we have to, at this point, at least depend on the veracity of the one person who was involved in this, the one witness, and that's Zimmerman. So it's extremely difficult, and so we really don't know from a law enforcement standpoint initially what took place, and even in this case, even after the investigation, we're still left kind of open as to what really happened. Based on the information provided by the one person.
So is the stand your ground law, is that frightening to law enforcement because you've got all these other people who are not police, being able to carry guns, being able to do what they need to do to protect themselves? Is that a frightening law to a police officer?
I wouldn't say so much as it's a frightening law. I would say it's a difficult law. Again, let me just state, especially if you're just dealing with one side or one witness or witnesses who take a particular side, and there are no witnesses with an opposing view, if you will. Mm-hmm. So that's where it really becomes difficult, and this has happened before, where we've seen homeowners defend their homes, get involved in shootings, and of course we only have the one side.
Mm-hmm. I want to play a clip from CNN's Anderson Cooper of juror B37, who talks about kind of where her thoughts were in terms of who Trayvon was, and then the response from Sabrina Fulton, who is Trayvon's mother, being interviewed by Nora O'Donnell. Let's listen to this and we'll talk on the other side.
Based on the testimony you heard, you believe that Trayvon Martin was the aggressor?
I think the roles changed. I think George got in a little bit too deep, which he shouldn't have been there. But Trayvon decided that he wasn't going to let him scare him and get the one over up on him or something. And I think Trayvon got mad and attacked him.
Did you hear that juror who spoke out with Anderson Cooper, and what did you think when you heard her say that she believes that Trayvon played a huge role in his own death?
I don't think she knows Trayvon. Trayvon is not a confrontational person. So instead of placing the blame on the teenager, we need to place the blame on the responsible adult. There were two people involved. We had an adult that was chasing a kid, and we had the kid who I feel was afraid.
It opens up the whole idea of perception. And I want to talk with you gentlemen about the perception of young African American men and how that played into this entire discussion, because that really has become the broader issue. I believe, in terms of what has happened with this trial. Have any of you ever been profiled? Because profiling was a part of this discussion.
This is Bruce. No,
Mm-hmm.
I do not believe in I have been profiled. I would have to say no at
Mm-hmm.
this point. Certainly not to the extent that Trayvon was and other black males are.
So anyone else? Jerrauld?
This is Clarence.
Clarence?
I have not, to my knowledge, been profiled, but I believe that's one of the issues. If you walk into a department store, it's not clear who's being profiled at that point in time. And so in terms of a personal, experience with it, no. But then I believe the issue is around what is that broader issue of just being profiled just because of who you are.
Mm-hmm. What about you, Judge Jones?
Well, I am a black man who has grown up in the United States of America, and in particular in a southern state, a very southern state, that is Virginia. And so I certainly, am prepared to believe that the experiences that I've had collectively, there are people who have made assessments of me based simply upon my appearance. I don't think there's probably any African American who doesn't feel at some point during their lifetime that they haven't been treated differently, if you will, simply because of the fact that they are black. I mean, historically in my life, I was denied admission to school simply because I was black and all those things. But I would say that, I'm sure at some point along the way, I have presented an image to some person based upon the way I was dressed, the way I had my hair cut, the way I, walked, whatever it might have been. I'm sure that those preconceived feelings that people have affected me in my life. It may have been oblivious to me. Maybe I didn't know that I was being quote unquote profiled. But you've had so many prominent people, black folk in this country who admit, they, Interstate 95, members of Congress been what they perceive as pulled over for no reason, simply because they were driving a large automobile, an expensive automobile. And I think that what people brought to this case, what people felt had happened in Sanford, Florida that night, is that, Trayvon didn't, quote unquote, belong in that particular area. I've heard people, there's conversations, discussions, and then Zimmerman, and I don't want to get too bogged down with all the facts because I really didn't hear them. I wasn't in the courtroom. I wasn't on the jury. But the things I think that are uncontroverted were that he was there, that Zimmerman engaged him. Zimmerman called the 911 because he was a quote-unquote suspicious person, and they told him not to follow, and he followed notwithstanding that while bearing an arm. I think all those things play into this question of profiling and that you're raising right now.
I want to read a quote from Richard Cohen. He is a columnist with the Washington Post. And he wrote, I don't like what George Zimmerman did, and I hate that Trayvon Martin is dead. He said, but I also can understand why Zimmerman was suspicious and why he thought Martin was wearing a uniform we all recognize. He said that he is tired of politicians who have donned hoodies in solidarity with Martin and who essentially suggest that for recognizing the reality of urban crime in the United States, I am a racist. The young people say all the time we should not just be judged by the clothing that we wear. Is it our fault then?
When you say our fault, Barbara, what do you mean by our fault?
Meaning that the young people are saying you profile me because I wear a hoodie, because I wear slouch pants, or because I dress differently, without giving me a chance to get to know me as a person.
Let me say this from a law enforcement standpoint, at least from my perspective as chief of police, former chief of police in Norfolk. Mm-hmm. One of the things that we stressed to the officers was not to profile based on appearances. The old saying, you can't judge a book by its cover, and to respect whoever it is out in the community. Now, that's the general rule of thumb or philosophy of the police department, if you will, under my leadership. Now, when we try to get that message down to the individual officer, sometimes it doesn't always sink in, and there's going to be some of those biases based on the way young people dress and maybe even behave nowadays. But it's not the way it should be. Just because someone wears a hoodie or have their pants slung a little bit low, we may not like it. But it doesn't mean that they're bad people or they're involved in something that is illegal. And just based upon appearances alone, if we're stopping or detaining anyone, it doesn't matter whether they're black or white, because nowadays you have young white males who dress the same way. We shouldn't be doing it. Mm-hmm. Unless we have some kind of facts that indicate that these individuals were involved in something illegal, we should not be profiling. We should not be making these kind of generalizations.
Anyone else want to respond before I throw out the phone numbers?
But the human nature is that people do make those determinations, and the facts are very oftentimes that the people who are committing bad acts, criminal acts, they do appear in that in that attire, that dress. Mm-hmm. I see it all the time in court. I adjudicate criminal cases all the time, every day, this day, and I will tell you that too often times that is the attire that the people who are the actual perpetrators of crime have adopted. And we've got gang colors, red and blue for Bloods and Crips. We've got all these things that now we see a lot of young people. Does that mean that, some young person who's wearing a red T-shirt is automatically a Blood? No, absolutely not. But are people going to look through the lens of what they know, in many cases, to be, in fact, people who are involved in gangs and proudly wearing that red? The answer is yes. So it's difficult and confusing, and sometimes these, judgments that people make, again, are that's the reality that the police have to deal with. That's the reality that the courts have to deal with, and I think that's ultimately the reality that we in the community have to accept.
440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240 are the numbers to call to join our conversation. We're talking about where do we go from here after the George Zimmerman verdict. 440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240. Now, Judge Jones, I know you have a son. Clarence, do you have children? Do you have male children?
Yes, I do. I have two sons.
Okay, I would love to hear. And Bruce Marquis, you have daughters, correct?
No, I have a 17-year-old daughter and a 19-year-old son.
So you have a son also. So I really want to know what kind of conversation you all are having with your sons in light of this. Can I start with you, Clarence?
Yes. In fact, my two sons are here with me this weekend, and we haven't had the in-depth discussion, but I'm more concerned about my grandsons because they are of the age where they're coming into the young teenage years where they would be more likely to be profiled, and the conversation would have to go along the way of recognizing the realities of the world that we live in. Profiling does happen, and we can't stop it, and what I would tell my grandsons is that they won't be able to stop it. So a part of their behavior will be important in how they address issues in the world. But I would also tell them to be to really kind of stand their ground in terms of their own recognition of what their rights are, and help them to understand what their responses should be to any situations where it appears they're being singled out. So I do think there's a responsibility that we have to help our children understand that reality is what it is, and we have to be able to make sure that we equip our young people with the kinds of tools to help them deal with that reality.
Judge Jones, what are you telling your son?
Well, interestingly, my discussion with my son has been perhaps a little different than the others because my son is studying law himself right now. He's in law school. And so as the trial, insofar as the trial was concerned, we have talked about the jury system, the importance of the jury. So we're coming at it from the law-involved family perspective and his take on that, and the fact that it's rather unusual that we had only a 6-person jury in a felony criminal case. I don't think that's the prevailing law in most states in the country. I was actually surprised to learn that Florida had that law in place there. The fact that there was only the same gender of every member of the jury, which again, in 33 years that I've been in law in Virginia, I've never seen a female or male-only jury. There's always been more diversity. So we've been talking about those things as relates to the trial, but certainly I've always lifelong discussions with my son about the realities of the world in which he has lives, in which he has come up, and that we must be very sober about the racialized world, notwithstanding the fact that we have an African American president, notwithstanding the fact we have made so many advances in so many ways, socially, politically, economically, and otherwise. It's still a very racialized world. All you got to do is, go on and read the blogs and the newspaper stories every day, and you'll see that kind of reaction. The letters about this case to the editor that I've been reading in my own hometown newspaper, some of them have shocked and appalled me. And so I want to make sure he understands that this is the world still in which he lives and must function.
Bruce Marquis, what do you say to your son?
Well, I've started with my son and daughter quite some time ago, quite frankly, but more so as he was approaching the age of being more of a public person. What I mean by that is being able to drive and just having his own freedom, if you will. A lot of the traffic stops, for instance, and we know this, despite what we may preach in law enforcement as chief executives, we know a lot of these things are going to take place during traffic stops, or that's the reason for the traffic stop, so-called reason for the traffic stop. The profiling, as we talk, and so I told my son how I thought he should behave. Should he be stopped, whether he's walking as a pedestrian or as a person behind the wheel of a vehicle, and because it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that his father is in law enforcement, is a chief executive, is a black male in the United States. I agree with the other two gentlemen in that profiling will always exist, and we as black men are going to be the recipients of that more often than not, more often than other people are, and it won't matter whether my son is again the son of someone who's in law enforcement, the individual officer, or maybe even not just the officer, but it could be the unspoken philosophy, if you will, of some departments. Hey, we're going to stop certain individuals based on how they look, and so when he gets stopped, I want him to be able to say, "Hey, Dad, you know, I did everything you told me to do. I kept my hands on the steering wheel. I was polite, not belligerent to the officer. So in other words, I gave them no reason to go any further than the reason they stopped me. Hopefully it was a legitimate traffic stop, but you know, it may not have been. But I didn't want the officer's behavior to go beyond that based on how my son was behaving. So I had to have that conversation with both him and my daughter. As a matter of fact, it was a written contract that I had them both sign once they were able to drive, and that was one of the stipulations in this written contract.
You know, there was a discussion last night on MSNBC with Chris Matthews, and he was talking with a vice president from NBC News and also Michael Steele, who ran the Republican Party for a while, and both of those gentlemen were talking about being stopped and about the conversations they had with their sons about when you get stopped and put your hands on the wheels, roll the windows down, no sudden movements, etc. And Chris Matthews, who is not African American, was stunned that type of conversation happens within black families. But for us, that is not a surprise.
It has to happen, Barbara. Those conversations have to take place, and if parents are not having those conversations, then woe be to them. That's all I can say. They have to have those kind of conversations with both son and daughters. Let's not take the young ladies out of the mix in this, particularly black young ladies or people of color. You know, I don't want to restrict this. I know Trayvon Martin was a young black male, but we have to look at other people of colors also, especially the Latino or Hispanic young males and young ladies also, because they're profiled, maybe not to the same degree. I don't know. That would be a study that would have to take place, or maybe it's already taken place, and I haven't seen the empirical evidence on it, but they're profiled also. But you have to, as a parent, you have to have those conversations with your young people.
If you're just joining us, we're talking about the aftermath of the George Zimmerman trial with the Honorable Judge Jerrauld Jones, law enforcement expert Chief Bruce Marquis, and Clarence Wilson, president of the Williamsburg, York, James City County chapter of the NAACP. We've got lots of calls waiting, so let's go to Pam in Yorktown. Pam, you're on the air.
Hi. I want to preface, I'm Caucasian. I'm 63 years old. I would have found Zimmerman guilty of manslaughter had I been on the jury. But two things. Yes, there is bigotry out there. There is racial profiling out there, and that's a long time before that'll ever go away. If it goes away against African Americans, it may pick up with another minority. However, I have daughters and granddaughters, and I've always told them, you dress like a slut when you go out in public. Don't be surprised if you are perceived as one. So we do have to talk to our children about what they look like when they present themselves to the public. And one other comment, and it has not been addressed, is that there's an assumption that Trayvon Martin at some point assaulted Zimmerman. Nobody has brought up what happened if they got into a verbal altercation and it ended up with a shoving match. And Zimmerman shoved Trayvon. Trayvon shoves back. Zimmerman loses his balance. He grabs a hold of Trayvon's hoodie because it's bulky. Poor balance. Zimmerman falls, hits his head on the concrete, and perhaps Trayvon's forehead hits his nose. Total accident on both parties. Oh, yes, they were shoving each other, but no intent was there. Nobody has brought that up as a potential. Okay. But regardless, that child had, no matter what he was doing right then and there, he didn't deserve to die.
Thank you so much for your call, Pam. We appreciate that. Pam brings up the point that we do have to talk to our children about the way that they dress, because that is the way that they're perceived if they dress in that manner. Anyone like to respond?
You know, I would hate to think that we have to kind of legislate what we wear. There are, basic standards of how we should present ourselves to the public. But there are good kids who wear hoodies and baggy pants and all manners of dress. I just think we've got to move beyond looking at the dress and find a way to look at the individual, because we're not going to be able to progress very far in society if we get comfortable with the situation that says we've got to be just so that everybody can accept us. I think that there needs to be education on both sides. I think certainly young people need to understand how their dress and how their manners and everything impact others. But I also think we have to make sure that we're talking to the broader society about understanding what differences mean, and that just because you have a hoodie does not mean that you are a criminal, and therefore you've got to look a little bit further. And so I'm not willing to put all of the responsibility around conforming our dress just so that society can accept us. I think there needs to be a common understanding and more willingness to look a little bit deeper.
Okay, thank you, Clarence, for that comment. Chandra joins us from Virginia Beach. Hi, Chandra. You're on the air.
Yes, hi. Yes, I just wanted to give my comment about the conversation that we give our children. Mm-hmm. It is true, because I have adult children, and the one thing is that I make sure that they, I tell them that their appearances, they need to keep clean shaving, and that sooner or later, it's just, you're judged by what you wear sometimes. I mean, I know with my son, I allowed him to drive my car. I have a Mercedes-Benz, and I let him use it, and he was stopped by the police, but he at least knew what I had taught him was to just make sure he be polite, be respectful. He whipped out the insurance card that he had permission to drive the car, because the first thing the police did ask him was, did you steal this car? He was a black male, driving the car, clean shaven, haircut neat, but that was the question that he was asking. When he whipped out and gave him the insurance card with permission, they let him go. He didn't act a fool. He wasn't disrespectful. It's just the manner you teach your children, and if they follow that, then maybe things won't happen.
Chandra, I'm curious. I'm curious as to whether your son told you how he felt when the officer asked him that question.
He did. He said he was mad because he didn't understand why would the police officer stop him and ask him, did he steal the vehicle? But I had to explain to him, because you were, I told him, I said, because you're a young black male riding in a high-class car, and you're not expected, maybe because you're young-looking, you're not expected to be driving in a vehicle of that, you just probably, they don't expect you to have a Mercedes-Benz. But they read the note that it's his mother's vehicle, and then they let him go.
Okay. Thank you so much for sharing that. We really appreciate that. Judge Jones, you've worked with juveniles in the juvenile justice system for a long time. And now as a judge, you are there when young African American, Latino, white kids young people come before you because they've run afoul of the law. Where do we start to turn this thing around, particularly with our young African American men? Because, you hear the statistics of not graduating from high school, getting involved with the justice system at early ages, not being able to be successful fathers and parents, et cetera. Where do we start to try to turn this around?
Well, the problem by the numbers is very daunting. There's no question about that. It's disappointing. It's depressing. There is disproportionality of racial minority contact at every point of the juvenile and criminal justice system. So, if you look at the numbers, you could be overwhelmed. And the experiences that those of us who are involved in the criminal / judicial system, will tell you that if you look into those situations, it always somehow comes back to the family. It comes back to, I'm not necessarily talking about the traditional family. I'm just talking about that loving, caring, involved adult and significant family kind of structure, and it can be non-traditional. When that is present, then the likelihood that there will be a poorer life outcome is diminished. And when it's present, we are always looking for better outcomes, and they generally occur. So the short answer is, where do we start? We start child by child. We take it one child at a time. We take it one family at a time. We take it one neighborhood, if you will, at a time. And we make a difference there. Be that significant, caring adult, responsible, take some responsibility for someone else in their lives, and that's how you ultimately will make a difference, and it will replicate and grow exponentially. That sounds simplistic. It sounds easy, but that's, in my experience, over these 33 years that I've been involved, that's the way you do it. Mm-hmm. You don't have to have, some big government, grant and all this kind of stuff and do all these things. You just do it one child at a time.
Clarence Wilson, you work with young people through the NAACP. What do they tell you about how they want to see their peers stay out of trouble?
Yeah, I think what we learn most about dealing with these young folks is, and I'll go back to the comment that was just made, they do want to feel loved and cared. What they tell us is that, and they tell us not in words so much as in how they relate, that they want to know whether you care about them. And they want to, and so that transcends to their peers too. If they don't have the confidence in themselves to really know that you care, you can talk to them all the time about you should do this, but unless they know that you really are caring about how they are as a person and really want them to succeed, it mm-hmm. really doesn't matter. We had an instance where a young man had really been acting out pretty much all year, and we told him, said, you can really do anything that you want to do. You are so talented and so smart. You could see the change in that young man's face, and so I think what they're looking for is people to care, and part of that is in the family, but part of that is in this broad network of the broader family that needs to embrace these kids. And then when they have that kind of confidence, they could go out and deal with their peers, because peer pressure is always going to be there. So we have to really build the young people, so that they can withstand that pressure and have some view of where they want to go in life themselves.
Mm-hmm. Bruce, would you like to see yourself put out of business because our young people are behaving themselves? How can we turn that around?
Oh, absolutely. Put out of business, not just because young people are behaving themselves, but adults are behaving themselves also. And but let me just say, I agree with both gentlemen. I just want to add one more thing to it. They both spoke of love and care, but structure. Young kids want structure also, and I don't think they get enough of any of the three: love, care, or structure. At least mm-hmm. those that we see on the wrong side of the criminal justice system. And when they don't get these things at home, as the judge indicated, as Clarence said, when we talk about peer pressure, then ultimately, in some cases, they end up where they think they are getting those things, and those are youth gangs. And if you'll study youth gangs, and you talk to the young people who get involved in youth gangs, they will tell you one of the reasons why they join, probably the first and foremost reason why they join, is because these are the people who care about them. These other gang members are the ones that they consider to be their family, and care about them more than what they get in their own households or perhaps the extended community, their neighborhoods. And so I agree with both of them, but I would also say young people need structure. They may not recognize that they need it, but they do need it, and they respond very positively when they get love care and they have structure in their life. Structure meaning, hey, where are you going? How are you marking your future? And these are the things that you need to do to get there. Get your education, stay out of trouble, just be a good citizen, etc., regardless of what age you are. And that's the structure end of it. And so we see that when they get that kind of structure, then they're on the right side of the law. They end up on the right side of the law more often than not. And when they don't get those ingredients, then they end up on the wrong side of the law.
Jerrauld, I heard you agreeing.
Yeah, and the acting out behavior, the misbehavior in school, the delinquent behavior outside of school, and even the low-level criminal behavior we find is very oftentimes this cry for attention, this cry for the structure. They're always testing boundaries. Just so are the kids who are in strong families. Children are always testing their parental boundaries. How far can they go? And I could not agree more with the chief that what the gang structures have become the substitute for the weak family structure. I'll put it that way, that very oftentimes now we find young people are brought up in, or not brought up in, as the case may be. So there's no mystery as to what the problems are, and there really is no mystery as to what we need to be doing to try to deal with those things through strengthening of families, through the public policy, through the social policy, through the legal system. We need to be doing everything we can do to promote families.
440.
Barbara, I would add just one thing, if I might.
Sure.
We really need to make sure that we're preparing our young people, for example, so that they can read. A child who can't read by the third grade has no way of being able to communicate the language that we're talking about today. They can't do math, they can't do science. And guess what's going to happen? They're going to act out in school because that's that protective mechanism to protect against everybody knowing that they can't do that. So we have got to make sure that we work with our children through the schools, through the churches, through whatever means we can, so that we prepare them when they get in school so that they do have the foundation to go on and learn. And a lot of that learning then cures some of the incidents of acting out that we see.
They actually say that by third grade, that's how they determine how many more prisons need to be built. So that does need to be turned around. I want to try to get real quick a call in very quickly, and then I'll come back to you. LaTroy joins us from Suffolk. Hi, LaTroy. You on the air?
Hey, how y'all doing?
Okay. Turn your radio down, okay?
All right. Going down to another room. As far as being racially profiled, I'm a 36-year-old man, and just because of what I wear and what I drive, I've been racially profiled several times. Not even asking what I do for a living, but just automatically assuming I'm a gangbanger or I'm a drug dealer or I use drugs or whatever. Unfortunately, that's not the case. I'm a college-educated black male. It's something that we go through all the time. So we could change our clothes. There's still going to be a perception there. I wear different clothes all the time. I may wear a hoodie. I may wear some sweats. That doesn't mean I'm a gangbanger. I may wear large jeans and a T-shirt. That doesn't mean anything. I wear a suit on Sunday morning because I'm in church. So it kind of doesn't matter what we wear. It's the perception of what people are automatically going to think of us just because of the color of our skin.
Okay.
The other thing is, I'm a business owner in downtown Suffolk, Virginia, and a lot of the other business owners, we've gotten together, and this Sunday we're having a peace rally at one of the plazas here. A lot of people have been asking for it, so we said, well, here it is.
Okay.
As crazy as it sounds, I'm kind of glad the verdict went the way it did. It opened up an opportunity for us to have these discussions.
Okay, tell us very quickly, because we're just about out of time. What time is the rally and where is it?
5:30 Sunday, 1226 White Marsh Road, Suffolk, Virginia, at the White Marsh Plaza.
Okay.
5:30.
Thank you so much for the call, LaTroy. Gentlemen, we've got about 2 minutes left, so I want each of you to just give us a closing statement in terms of the healing. Where do we need to go as a society? What do we need to do moving forward? Let's start with Clarence Wilson, who is the president of the Williamsburg, York, James City County NAACP.
Well, again, thank you for the opportunity. I think on August 24th, the 50th anniversary of the Poor People's March on Washington will take place. And this march this year will talk about not only the Trayvon Martin situation, it'll talk about the voting rights issues. There are a number of issues that are impacting how the society looks at us as black people, and a number of things, and so I believe the healing needs to start in
there.
The various rallies. But I would encourage all of us to go out and let the world see that we do not agree with the direction of a number of these issues. And then we can come back to our communities and do the same thing. But
Okay.
I believe we just need to demonstrate that.
Okay, Clarence, thanks so much. I hate to cut you off, but we're just about out of time. I want to give the other two gentlemen a chance. Thank you for joining us today. That was Clarence Wilson, the president of the NAACP in Williamsburg, York, and James City County. Bruce Marquis, Chief Bruce Marquis, 10 seconds, final thought.
Yeah, let's not do anything stupid out there as a society. We must recognize there are some realities, whether we agree or disagree with outcomes. But let's not perpetuate our anything that's going to add to that. Okay.
Okay.
We have enough problems in this world as it is, and this is unfortunate. But let's go forward positively.
Okay, thank you so much. That's Bruce Marquis, former police chief here in Norfolk. And Jerrauld, literally, you got 10 seconds.
I just want to say that this really should be a call to everyone to rededicate themselves to civic participation, civic engagement, because it's through that way we can influence the institutions of government, the judicial, the executive, and the legislative.
Okay, thank you so much, Judge Jerrauld Jones with the Norfolk Circuit Court, and we will be right back.
Hello, I'm Mike Tomlin, head coach of the Pittsburgh Steelers, and you're listening to Another View on WHRV 89.5 FM.
And welcome back. This past Tuesday on NPR's All Things Considered, there was an audio essay delivered by youth radio reporter Miles Bess. Miles lives in Oakland, California, and he talks about how he is supposed to feel as a young African American man in light of the Zimmerman verdict. I found his commentary so profound that I decided to share it with you.
I don't know how I should feel about the George Zimmerman verdict. I was the same age as Trayvon Martin when he was killed. It was the first shooting case that got national attention where I felt connected, like I could relate. When I first heard the story, it seemed clear. Trayvon Martin was young and he was murdered. I thought it would be an open and shut case. As time progressed, it changed. The more information came out, the more complicated the case became, and then the verdict was announced. I wasn't surprised, but I was emotionless. Should I be angry? Should I be sad? I felt like goop. No shape, no structure. I decided to go to Arnold Perkins, someone with deep roots in Oakland in the civil rights movement who is a mentor to black youth like me, hoping he could help me understand my feelings. He's a former member of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. He was also head of the Alameda County Public Health Department. I turned to Perkins because, honestly, I felt lost.
Part of the lostness, it's of the making of my generation because we came through the civil rights era, so we thought we were free through integration, and then we set out to get minds, and then I got mine and I left you behind, and that's what we're suffering from now, is we've walked away from your generation.
I see another side to that. I wonder if it's not that the older generation walked away. It's that the younger generation, my generation, didn't step up to replace those civil rights leaders in the community. So when something big happens, we don't know how to respond, and things keep happening. I was 14 when 22-year-old Oscar Grant was shot and killed on a subway platform in Oakland. In a lot of ways, the full significance went over my head. Now I really get it in light of Trayvon Martin's death. This kind of thing keeps happening to people like me daily. My family has been telling me this since childhood, but now it has greater meaning. I grew up in a neighborhood where on my block it was fine, but a few blocks over it was more transitional. As a fourth grader, every time I went outside, whether I was going to school or hanging out with friends, my Grammy and my mom would always tell me to be careful and to look out for myself. As I entered middle school, their directions got more specific. Miles, make sure when you walk home you change your route. You never know who's watching. Up until that point, I thought they were just being overprotective. But now as an 18-year-old, I realized they weren't so much worried about me. They were concerned about those around me and how they would perceive me. As a young black man, I'll always have this cloud following me, evoking fear, hate, and sometimes empathy. At 71 years old, Arnold Perkins is still living with that cloud, and it angers him.
Racism has never rested. There's a string, a history of it going on from the time of slavery up until now. Nothing has changed. And so you could take Oscar Grant, you could take Emmett Till, you can take Trayvon Martin, you could take them all. And it's the same pattern that goes on where people are afraid of us. I, as an African male walking down the street, a 71-year-old African American walking down the street, people are afraid, you know? And so we have to deal with that.
That's why what's next is really important. I don't want to shrug my shoulders and say, what can you do? At any other time, there were obvious leaders and obvious movements that I could have gone to for answers. As I get older, I realize that stories like Trayvon Martin's were always close to home. I just had to grow up to understand how they relate to me. My Grammy's warnings have a deeper meaning now. They weren't just about rules like looking both ways before I cross the street or not talking to strangers. She was telling me, I'm a target. For NPR News, I'm Miles Best.
An audio essay from NPR's youth radio reporter Miles Best, and something for all of us to think about. And before I let you go today, I want to talk to you about an event I went to last weekend. It was called the Diva Pool Party, and it was a bunch of African American women who came together to support a charity and to have fun and to sit around a pool. And the rules were this: no men, no children, and you had to wear a bathing suit. And that was the great equalizer, absolutely, as they said. But they came together to give to a charity and to fellowship together. And the reason I share that story is because I want the audience to know that we all are just human beings, and we all come together and we all can do something good for this community, and that's what it's all about. So that's our show for this Friday. Next week, it's another View on Health with Dr. Keith Newby, and we're talking about obesity. For producer Lisa Godley, audio engineer Perry Smith, Lauren Horton, who answered our phones, I'm Barbara Ham Lee. Have a fantastic weekend, and let's get together again next Friday at noon for another View.